Join me in learning Chitas for today, Parshas Vayeitzei, the fourth Torah reading for Wednesday, chapter 30, verse 14. Yesterday's Chitas we read about the birth of the first of the tribes. Leah gave birth to 4 boys and then to a daughter Dinah. Then Rachel gave her bondswoman to Yaakov, and they have 2 children, 2 boys, and as well as Leah did the same for her bondswoman, they had 2 boys as well. So we have studied about the birth of Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Gad and Asher, and Dan and Naphtali, and the story of Dinah. Today the Torah continues about the life of Yaakov, Rachel, and Leah. Verse 14. Vayelech Reuven b'meiktzir chitim, and Reuven was taking a walk during the season of the wheat harvest. Vayimtza dudoim, and he found mandrakes in the field. Basada in the field. Vayavei oisem aleya, and he brought them to Leah, Imai his mother. Vatoimer Rachel aleya, and Rachel said to Leah, Tenina li, please give me midudaei beneich, from your son's mandrakes. The Torah, Rashi explains to us what's happening here. Why does it tell us that it was specifically in the time of harvest? And he says as follows, Rashi, why are we stressing the fact that it was the time of the wheat harvest? To tell us the praise of the tribes. It was a time of harvest. So therefore, the fields were then, everybody was able to go on it. And he did not steal any wheat or barley from other people's fields. Ella, only. He found these mandrakes that nobody was cared about it, and therefore it was hefker, it was left for everybody to have. So it wasn't something that he went into somebody's field, though it was harvest and everybody had their wheat and barley lying around. He did not take any of those and took something which nobody cared about. Dudaim. What are these dudaim? Commonly translated as flowers. The Gemara explains that this was sigle, a mandrakes, type of esavu. It was a type of grass. B'Shem Yishmael, jasmine. According to some in the Arab language, it's called jasmine. And some translate these dudaim as jasmine flowers as well. Verse 15. Vatoimer la, and she answered to Rachel, Hama'at kachte chazishe, isn't it enough that you took my husband? V'lakachte gam dudai as gamas dunai beni, and you also want to take my son's mandrakes, my son's flowers? Vatoimer Rachel, so Rachel responded to Leah, Lachen yishkav imach halayla, therefore in exchange you will be able to get to be with Yaakov, to sleep with Yaakov tonight, tachas tudai beneich, instead, in exchange of your son's mandrakes. Over here, Rashi tells us, verse 15, V'lakachta games dudai beni b'tmiya. She was saying that in a question. You already took my husband, and now you also want to take my flowers? You also want to do this? Likach games dudai beni, to also take my son's mandrakes? Rashi explains, and the word over here, as in the Targum, when we use the terminology v'lakachas or v'lakachta, meaning in the future, ulemesav, and you want to take it. Meaning, not only have you taken my husband, you also want to take my son's flowers. Interestingly enough, the commentaries explain here that though technically Leah took Rachel's husband, but Rachel was so careful in the way she gave Leah the signs that she should not even think to be embarrassed that initially Rachel was the intended one by Yaakov. And therefore, when she told Leah about the signs, which was Chana, she said, by the way, it's good to know that a Jewish woman or a woman should know about these 3 important values, and thereby Leah thinking at this moment that really she was the one that was always intended to marry Yaakov. So we see the humility that even though it brought to some embarrassment later on. This was the time that Rachel had, but she exchanged it with Leah for the flowers. Really intent, I was supposed to be with him tonight. But I am going to give it to you in exchange for the flowers of your son. Now, Lafisha Zilzala b'mishkav tzadik, being that Rachel was gave up on that merit, and she felt that this was easily to be exchanged for. Leizachzali cover, she did not merit to be buried with Yaakov in the cave of the patriarchs. She was buried on the side of Beis Lech, on the side of the road by Beis Lechem, on the way to Ephrath, as we're going to learn later on in chapter 35. Verse 16. Vayova Yaakov ben Asada, and Yaakov returned from the field that evening. Ba'erev in the evening. Vayeitzei Leah likrasei, and Leah went out to greet him. Vatomer, and she said, Elai Tova, you're going to come to my tent tonight, this evening. Halayla, this evening. Elai Tova, you're going to come to me tonight. Because I hired you in exchange for my son's mandrakes. Vayishkav ima balaylahu, and she cohabited with him that night. With her, that Yaakov and Leah cohabited with each other that night. The Torah now tells us, Rashi explains, what does it mean? I hired you? Meaning, I have an obligation. Rachel, though that you are really intended to be with Rachel, still in all Nasati Rachel schara, I paid Rachel instead with those mandrakes. Balaylahu, that night, HaKadosh Baruch Hu sayoi sheyetche misham Yisachar. Though that it was only that night, this tells us that this was a blessing that Hashem gave her, that she would be able to have Yisachar because of that. Vayishma likim Leah, and God heard Leah. That means he took her efforts, the very fact that she wanted to be with Yaakov, as a very special sign. Vatar, and she conceived Vateled liYaakov ben Chamishi, and she gave birth to Yaakov, a fifth son. What does it mean God heard Leah? Rashi explains, we don't see this by the other times. Because since she had a desire to have more children and to have more of the tribe, so God heard her cry and her prayers. Vatomer Leah, and Leah said, God gave me my reward, Asher nasati shivchasi liishi, because for having given my bondswoman to my husband, Vatikra Shema Yisachar, and she gave the name to her son Yisachar. You'll notice that the name Yisachar is something very interesting here. That generally, though we pronounce the word Yisachar, the name Yisachar, but in the Torah it has an extra sin. The Rebbe explains, and Chassidus tells us, quoting from his father, I believe Yitzchak, that you have Yisachar, he was the one to later on to study Torah. And the name Yisachar symbolizes the sin that is pronounced and the sin that is not pronounced. The revealed part of Torah and the esoteric part of Torah, the one that's not pronounced. The Torah now continues with verse 19. Vatar oid, and she conceived again Leah, Vateled ben Shishi liYaakov, and she gave birth to a sixth boy to Yaakov. Verse 20, Vatomer Leah, and Leah said, Zavadani alikim oisi zevetoiv. God has indeed given me a superlative portion. Hapam yizbaleni ishi. Now my husband will surely make his chief abode, his main place. Ki aladati loy shisha banim, because I gave birth to him 6 boys. Vatikra shma Zvulun, and therefore she named her son Zvulun. What is the word Zavulun Zevet Toiv means? So Rashi explains to us and says as follows: Zevet Toiv, like the Targum explains, a good portion. Chulak Toiv. Yizbaleni, what is the word Yizbaleni? So the word comes from Lashain Beis Vul, a place of dwelling. Like in Old French, here Baira, or hibernate, if you want to take it to the Latin origination, staying in one place. Bayis mother, a place of living. And this is what she explains with the name. Leah says as follows: from now on, his main place of dwelling will be with me, because I have as many boys as the rest of his wives. Like I have half of the tribes that the rest of the wives have, 2 each, and I have 6. The Torah now continues with the birth of another child. And after that, she gave birth to a daughter, Vatikra Shma Dina, and she gave her name Dina. Verse 21. What Rashi, Dina, why did he call her Dina? The Torah doesn't say why she was called Dina. Pirshu Rabbi Seinu, the rabbis though explain, Shadana Leah Dina Ba'atzma. Leah made judgment to herself, saying, Im ze zachar, if this child that I'm pregnant with will be a boy, a male, my sister Rachel won't even be like one of the bondswomen, because all of them have 2 boys, and she won't even have 1 boy, because somebody's going to, there's only 12. So therefore she prayed, this was an unusual circumstance, that though all of them already gave birth to 2 boys, Rachel still hasn't had a child, so Rachel will only be left with 1 boy, if this is going to be a boy. So therefore she prayed, and this fetus became a girl, a female. Verse 22, after Leah gave birth to another 2 boys and a girl, and all the bondswomen already given birth, Vatar vateled vayisker lekimes Rachel, and God remembered Rachel vayishmaela, and He heard her prayers. Vayishmael lekim, and God heard her prayers. Vayiftach es rachma, and He opened her womb. Vayisker lekimes Rachel. What does it mean that God remembered Rachel? What did God remember? So Rashi tells us, Zachar, He remembered His righteousness. Shemasra simana lachiseh, that she gave the signs to her sister. Shahaisa mitzeira, that she was worried and concerned. Shemetala begirali shal Esav, that maybe she may have to marry Esav. Shema yigarshena Yaakov, maybe she was concerned that Yaakov would divorce Rachel now. Lafishein labanim, that she doesn't have children. So Rachel now was concerned that she may have to now marry Esav. Because if Yaakov divorces Rachel because she didn't have any children from her, now Esav is going to come. And what's going to happen? Even Esav also had this in mind, because he heard, when he heard that she doesn't have any children, he said, okay, I'll go and marry Rachel now. This is what we have in one of the poems in the liturgy that we find on Rosh Hashanah, that it says, Ha'admoin kibot shalichala tzava. Ha'admoin, the red one, referring to Esav, when he saw that Rachel had no children, tzava, he had a desire, lakachta loy v'nispahala, to take her for a wife, and therefore Hashem heard her cries and opened her womb, and she was able to have a child. That means the exchange initially, Leah was the one that concerned to marry Rachel, to marry Esav. Over here, Rachel gave over the signs to Leah. Now Leah was the one married to Yaakov. She was the one that had children with Yaakov. She now was concerned, Rachel was concerned that she might have to marry Esav, because she had no children. Yaakov would have to divorce her. And over here, as we see, that Hashem remembered her and then gave her a child. Verse 23. Vatar vateled bein, and she conceived and she gave birth to a child. Vatomer, and she said, Osaf alikim es charpasi, may God, and God has taken away my disgrace. Verse 23, Rashi, Osaf means from the word of gathering, hichnisa, meaning b'makim shaleitira. He gathered it in a place where it should not be seen. V'chein esef charpasenu, like it says in Isaiah, that God gathers our embarrassment. V'le'yosef abaisa. Another time we also find that they did not bring them into the home, and therefore they ended up dying, talking about the plagues of hail. Osvu nogham, in the book of Joel, that they gathered the stars are gathered together, virachich le'yosef, as lo yitamein, other places where we see the terminology of Yosef mean to gather. Charpasi, what does it mean by embarrassment? Shayisi l'charpa, because I was embarrassed up until now. Shani akara, because I was barren. And people would say about me, you are not deserving of being a wife to such a great person as Yaakov, because you didn't have children. And I was concerned that Yaakov would divorce me, and I would end up having to marry Esav the wicked. And the Medrash explains, why is this? Because Kol Zman Shein Le'isha Bein, because as long as a woman does not have a son, she doesn't have within whom to justify the mistakes and to hide her embarrassment. Once the woman has a son, so then anything that happens, she blames on the son. Therefore, when she's asked by her husband, who broke this thing? Bincha. She would answer back, hey, it was your son. Who ate these figs? Bincha, your son. So when a woman has a child, she's able to blame whatever happens on the child and say, hey, it's your son that did it. It's not my son, and it's not my fault. You're the one that brought him here, and this is where it's all happening. Therefore, now when she has a son, God gathered her embarrassment. She now has not to be embarrassed. She has who to blame things on. That's what children are for, I guess. Verse 24. Vatikra Shmo Yosef, and she called him Yosef. Now the Torah tells us another reason why she named him Yosef. Lamer saying, Yosef Hashem li beinacher. May God add me another son. Rashi, Yosef Hashem li beinacher, verse 24. Rachel wasn't technically asking for only one child. What happened was she knew with prophecy that Yaakov is only going to have 12 tribes, being that 11 tribes were already born. So she says, Amra, she asked, may it be the will of God. I say that final child, that 12th child, that he's going to have, many, should be from me. Therefore, she only asked for one more child because she knew there was supposed to be one more child, and she wanted that last remaining child that still had to be born should be from her. Verse 25. Vayehi, and it was. This is now in the year 2199, 14 years that Yaakov agreed to work for Lavan have now come up. And Yaakov tells, Kasher Yolda Rachel as Yosef, when Rachel gave birth to Yosef, Vayomer Yaakov Lavan, and Yaakov now turns to Lavan, and he says he wants to now journey back home. El Shalcheni, send me on my way. Ve'elchan, I will go. El Makoimi, to my home. Ula Artzi, and to my land. Rashi, Kasher Yolda Rachel as Yosef. Why does the Torah juxtapose the two? That it was only once Yosef was born, then does Yaakov say he wants to return home? The moment, because until now he was afraid Esav might hurt him. But at this point, we have Yosef was the one who was going to be the counterpart of Esav, the one to stand up against Esav. Because once the Satan of Esav was born, as the verse says in Ovadia, that at the end of days, when Esav will be able to try to come to hurt the Jewish people, they are going to be destroyed like fire consumes straw. So as long as Yosef wasn't yet born, Yaakov wasn't sure that he would overcome Esav. The moment Yosef was born, he knew that he would be able to overcome Esav. Because a fire without a flame will not be able to have a strong and a power for a distance. But however, once Yosef was born, that now that flame and the fire was able to be strong, he knew that God gave him the promise that he was going to be able to overcome Esav. And now he wanted to return home. Now that Yosef was that flame, that fire, that counterpart of Esav, he knew that he would be able to overcome Esav. So what does he demand of Lavan? Yaakov demands of Lavan, verse 26. Tanas Noshai, give me my wives, my children, that I worked for you, that I served you for. The Elchan, I will go, ki ata yadaita, because you know, that the work that I've done, I have filled my contract, I have done my duty, I have kept my part of the deal. Rashi, Tinanas Noshai, why did he have to ask Lavan for permission to give him his wives? They were his, he married them. Meaning he was being respectful. I don't want to leave without permission, and therefore he asks if he can take his wives, meaning with your permission. Verse 27. And Lavan tells them, if only I would find favor in your eyes, and I would like you to stay. Nichashti, I have learned by divination. That it is your account that God has blessed me with sons, as we're going to see, that only up until now he only had daughters, and now he had sons as well. Rashi, verse 27, Nichashti, that God blessed me. What does it mean, nichashti, by divination? Menache shayisi. I try to find out things through different ways. Nisisi benichushali. I tried with my divination. Shal chabali b'bracha. That I realized and I figured out that it was because of you and in your merit that I have this blessing. What's the blessing? When you came here, I had no sons. Shenemar, because it says that Rachel's daughter was coming with the sheep. Does it make sense that a person who has sons, he's going to send his daughter to go take the flock to drink and to send them amongst the shepherds? But now, because he had no sons, therefore his daughters had to go. But now, he had sons. How do we know he had sons? Because later on in chapter 31, it says, Vayishmas divrei Lavan, and they heard the sons of Lavan he heard the sons of Lavan speaking. This concludes the fourth Torah reading for Parshas Vayeitzei.